Welcome to the Rotary Club of Martinsburg podcast, where service meets community. I'm your host, Kevin Brackens, and I'm going to connect you with the people, stories, and projects that are making a difference here in West Virginia and beyond. At the Rotary Club of Martinsburg, we believe in service above self. Each week, we'll dive into conversations with local leaders, volunteers, and change makers who are driving positive change in our community. This conversation is made possible by Brackens Painting. Brackens Painting is the region's best residential and commercial painting company. When schedule and quality count on Brackens. We've got you covered. Okay, let's get started. John, thank you for being on the podcast.
Hey, it's great to be here. This is a new experience for me, and I'm looking forward to getting to know you better and to share some of my background.
Well, thanks. It's going to be fun. So yeah, let's just jump right into that. Let's go to background. Where are you from? What do you do for a living? What's your education in? How did the whole John Taylor thing come about?
Well, I was born in Southern California and grew up there. After high school, I went across the country to the University of Miami. My father likes to tell the story that he picked the place furthest away and sent me there. But I know it was a joke because he picked a pretty expensive place to send me to. But anyway, I went there. I took a year off in between, but I graduated from Miami. And afterwards hitchhiked around the country and then moved to Hawaii, where I stayed for almost 4 years. I worked in hotel management there, my first job.
What did you study at Miami?
I studied business and political science.
Nice. And what year was that?
That was in the late 60s, early 70s.
Right.
So it was Vietnam time.
Which island in Hawaii?
I went to the Big Island, and I first went to Kona because a friend I knew lived there, so I had a place to stay anyway. I went there. I was pretty broke when I got there, and got a job working in a restaurant, and then finally got an entry-level management job at Kona Hilton, and worked there through people I met. There was another hotel, a larger hotel on the other side of the island in Hilo that hired me where I became the youngest executive assistant manager of a hotel in the state, and worked for Waiakea Village for a couple of years, and really enjoyed that. It was really testing my limits. I was in my 20s, and most of the people that worked for me were older, and it was fascinating. Hilo was great.
Well, that's amazing because Hawaii is a place that, if you're lucky, you get to visit once. I've been to Kona. That's the only time I've ever been to Hawaii, and it's amazing. It's just an amazing landscape. It's one side of the island's like you're on the moon, and the other side of the island's green and lush.
Right.
Yeah,
just very different. I think if I remember right, Kona gets about 30 inches of rain a year, and Hilo gets 140 inches a year.
How about that? All right, cool. So what happened next? How long were you in Hawaii?
I was there 3.5, almost 4 years, and I had taken a year off. I wasn't working. Phenomenal time, but it was time to get back to work. But one of the jobs I had applied for was a blind ad. It was for a Peace Corps recruiter.
Wow.
And so I went through that process and thought, well, I'll just leave for a couple of years and have this adventure. That was 45 or 50 years ago.
So I've seen Peace Corps recruiters, but my only exposure to them is at a university level where they're kind of at a job market at a college. What was it like for you?
Well, the recruiter actually lived in Oahu, so on a different island. So I never met her. But you just went back and forth and, filled out at the time. Peace Corps has gone through different iterations of whether they assign you a job or let you pick. And I got to pick. So basically with my background, I had a little bit of background in cooperatives and in business management. And so I was offered a job in Botswana, one in Chile, and one in El Salvador.
Wow.
But the job in El Salvador was to be a business advisor to agricultural cooperatives. So I wanted to learn about agriculture. Still working on that one. But the idea to help people be more organized and more efficient and all of that, and work within a cooperative structure that brings supposedly brings a lot of democracy with it. So
Right.
I got to do that. It turned out I had a very different Peace Corps experience, and had 3 different jobs while I was there. The first one that I was assigned to, which turned out great, but there were 2 factions that were trying to take control of the organization, and because it was so many people involved, 300,000 people in a small country, they were a political force, and this was during the build-up to the Civil War, so it was very divided. And
What year was that?
I was there in 77, 78.
77. Okay.
And they'd had a coup earlier in the year, in 77 when we got there, and then you could tell it was building up to war. And because I was involved with this cooperative, I met people who were involved in the politics. And
Sure.
so I got to learn a lot about their situation, but also what the U.S. was doing.
Helping or hurting. Yeah, I get that. So let's at some point we're going to talk about your adventures in El Salvador as part of being a Rotarian and how you've been able to give back. But tell me, when did you first hear about Rotary?
I'm really not sure. I moved in about 79 or 80 when I was in Washington. A friend
State
of mine,
or D.C.? Washington State or D.C.?
Oh, D.C. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, and I moved to D.C. from the Peace Corps thinking I would only stay a few months and sort of tell the story of what I thought this build-up to war was going to bring. Now I've lost my train of thought there.
That's how I railroad people's notes all the time. I'm sorry, John. So let's go back and create some more clarity. So you were in the Peace Corps in El Salvador.
Okay.
You saw how the challenges were coming. So then, were you still a part of the Peace Corps when you came to the D.C. area, or were you coming as an advocate of some sort?
I was just coming to. I left Peace Corps a little bit early, and that's a whole other story. But they bring you to Washington to do an exit interview,
Okay.
and then you can go home.
I see.
I stayed and wanted to stay a little longer, so I thought I'd get a job, and I needed my airplane ticket, so I cashed it in to have a little bit of money, thinking I would later buy it. But it was 45 years later when I finally went back to Hawaii.
Wow.
For a visit.
Wow.
And so I was here and went through that, and then I ended up making a life here. I
Gotcha.
got married, had kids, and
Nice. Okay, so what was the first Rotary Club that you joined?
I first joined the Wheaton Kensington Rotary Club.
In Maryland?
Yes, in Maryland, in the suburbs of D.C. It was a smaller club, about 35, 40 people, and I was with it for many years. And what attracted me to it, I was told in El Salvador, by this friend of mine who kind of became a mentor, so to speak. He said, "Well, just don't go join some group that you're going to agree with everything. Go find people that are on the other side, so you're getting all the perspectives." And for me, Rotary was sort of a conservative group I could join. Some of the more liberal groups, a little bit of trust issue there, and Rotary is such an established, great organization, and I learned about it, made lifelong friends.
Great. How many clubs have you been a member of? So you were with the Wheaton Kensington. Did you pivot to another one when you moved, or just to change of taste, or what?
Yeah, it's sort of interesting. Wheaton Kensington, as Rotary clubs are going through, was aging out.
Okay.
And so it dwindled, and I had left because I had young kids, and then I adopted kids, and it was just chaos, and I just couldn't take it on. But then when things settled down a little bit, the Wheaton Kensington Club was down to about 8 or 10 people. And so they asked me to come back and sort of help make it go. Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
And it wasn't working.
Mm-hmm.
So we went back to the original club, the Silver Spring Club, and they were having the same issue. So we said, well, maybe we should unite. So then we came back together, and that club at the time was probably 30 people, but it was still dwindling. And I was with them for a few years, and then just before I retired, a couple years before I retired, it was really aging out.
What year was the Silver Spring Club that when they combined? What approximately?
That was probably around 2015.
Okay.
Yeah. And so then I moved to West Virginia, maybe 15 or 16. And then I moved to West Virginia in 18 and commuted for a year back and forth, but I wasn't part of Rotary. And then after I retired, I took a trip to El Salvador and then started looking for another Rotary Club.
Nice. And then that was the Shepherdstown?
Yeah.
Yeah, is that where you live, Shepherdstown?
Yeah, I lived in Shenandoah Junction when I first moved up here, and so that was the
closest.
Closest. I looked at a couple clubs that seemed to fit the best.
Wonderful. What's it? I know I pivoted from the Charlestown Club to the Martinsburg Club, and I took a break during COVID just because I like the energy of the lunches, the meetups. I like the energy of being around good people that are all in their own way, sort of trying to move the needle to help the community, based on whatever they can handle. But my pivot from one club to another was kind of based on, I just didn't like how it was going during COVID because these on screens and things like that. There was remote meetings, and I just didn't get the energy that I used to, so I kind of resigned from that club. After joining this club, though, the two of them are run somewhat similar. The one in Charlestown wasn't as big and still had really great programs and projects that they were working on. And then the club that we're both in now, the Martinsburg Club, seems exceptionally organized, exceptionally sort of regimented, right down to how the meetings go, stuff like that. And then having Chastity in here a couple weeks ago, she was talking about how the new satellite club in Spring Mills is, and it's interesting how clubs can create their own personality. They can create their own focus and purpose and their own routine of how many meetings they have per month or per year even. But it's a collaboration of people who are trying to make things better in the community.
Yeah.
So what attracted you to the Martinsburg Club, the lunchtime?
Well, on the first trip, I've taken a couple of small Rotarian groups to El Salvador, and on the first trip was Pam Wagner.
Oh yeah, okay.
And she is just a phenomenal leader in person, and so when I decided I wanted something different than how Shepherdstown was being organized, I came here and was very welcomed at the first couple meetings.
Sure.
And I'd spoken to the club before. I've spoken to about 20 of the 60 clubs, or maybe a few more, about international service. And so it just felt right,
I get it, and anybody who's listening who's never changed clubs, you can shop it around. You can go around and see what are the people like. It's just having lunch or a dinner or maybe a social or however it's set up. But whether you're going from Shepherdstown to Martinsburg or Martinsburg to Shepherdstown or any other sort of pivot, it's just about the good feelings that you get, whether it's the right sort of group for you. And you don't have to join immediately. You can kind of hang out for a few of the meetings and just see, is this the sort of group I want to be a part of? So I get that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the nice things. I think people should visit more Rotary clubs. Rotarians should visit different clubs, just see how they're run. Maybe not necessarily in your own area, but when you travel, I always recommend people try and at least hit one Rotary club if they're gone somewhere for a week.
Yeah, if the schedule works out, right.
And the people are great, and I'm constantly raising money for small projects, and people seem really appreciative of hearing about them, and frequently I'll pick up a few $100 for some project here or there at most clubs that I visit. So
That's really nice. That's really, really nice. Let's jump into, leadership. So you mentioned organizing trips to El Salvador, and I believe you're also, what other committees are you on?
Well, I'm the District 7360 International Service Chair. So when they asked me to do that, because they learned when I first moved here that I had this international interest, so I was appointed to that.
I'm sorry, it's called the International, what's the chair? International
Service Chair.
Service Chair, okay.
Yeah. So when I first got to that, appointed to that, I said, well, I really need to sit in on the foundation committee meetings because that's where the money is, and anything I would do would have to go through that committee anyway. And
right.
So I asked if I could just sit in, and they said, oh, you should be a member. So I'm a member of the foundation committee.
Okay. Is that on the district level?
On the district level.
Okay.
Yeah. And in the past, I was president of the Wheaton Kensington Club for about 3 years, and then treasurer, and so I've had a few different positions on the club level, and then this one position on the district level.
Okay. So El Salvador, you spent some time there in the Peace Corps. You saw the challenges that they had. You saw that Rotary was really well organized at finding ways to help. Explain the 10-cent part of that project for me. The 10-cent meaning, what's a brief summary where we don't just jump into an entire another content list? We'll talk about the trip in detail and how it plays out in another conversation. But
okay.
How did you figure out, or when was the first trip?
Well, when I retired, which I was going to work a few more months, but I ended up retiring sort of suddenly the day before I had a trip planned to El Salvador. So when I went down there, I went to an NGO that I've known since the 70s, and people that always kept in touch with throughout the years, and raised some funds for them. They were working on I said to them, I don't know if I can raise funds or not, but send me to a couple communities to talk to them. And so, through that, I saw some potential projects. I had connected to some Rotarians down there through another community that I had worked with, set up a group to work with them since '09, and they were still working there. They did a water project way up in the mountains. It's on the Honduran border. And so I happened to be in country when they did the dedication for the water thing. And the Rotarians were coming to visit for the day, for the ceremony. But it's a 3 or 4 hour trip out of the capital to get up there. And so I met them and then told them that I had these potential projects to do. Would they want to see some of them to work with? So, a few days later, a couple of them came and picked me up, and we went out to the countryside, and I had arranged for 5 different communities to give us a whole list of what their needs were. And they put them all on the board, and they were all there, and we picked the one that we thought was the most needed and was ready to be able to accept the help. It's not, when you're doing development, it's not just enough to go out and have an idea of what you want to do and how you want to improve people's lives. First, you've got to go out and ask them what they need.
Sure.
And that's the first step. It's a step that was long overlooked by the U.S. government for decades and decades.
Sure.
But they've started asking people, what do you need? So,
What are some examples of that? One or two examples?
well, examples of where it goes wrong.
No, just
Where
examples that were immediately came to your attention. I know fresh water is one of them.
Well, water's kind of the most obvious one because there are ways to get by without electricity, but you can't get by without water.
Right.
And so it's really needed. And the community we picked was because they were losing their access to water. They had. It's a longer conversation, but it's part of the land reform and everything. They're breaking up these large landowners, and they had broken this up so this community had it, but the well where they could get water from was not part of their parcel.
Gotcha.
And they were using it, and they had this agreement that 2 to 3 times a week they would turn on the taps in their community, so they'd have to store water for a few days. And but that piece of land was going to be broken off a few years later, and so they were going to lose access.
All right. So water. You mentioned electricity. That's something else you guys have helped with programs, bringing electricity, or more electricity, I guess, or.
Well, on a very small level, electricity is a public utility. We take for granted that water is here in the U.S., but in other countries, electricity is generally a public utility. And so you're not going to expand that system without the government. But what you can do in remote areas where they're not bringing electricity is you can get a few simple solar panels and get people at least part-time electricity.
Okay. So it's really great that you're taking your skill set and your experience and you're helping be the tip of influence, even on a district with like 70 clubs. That's really wonderful that you're able to give that back.
Well, it's been satisfying. It's been a lot of fun, and
is El Salvador the only remote place that you've gone with Rotary?
It is, yeah.
And that's because of your established history with the country then, and seeing what it was like and what it could be and what it is becoming?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's that experience in your friendships, and Pam said that, after the trip, she said one of the things that she liked most was that we'd go places that you never would because of relationships that I've been fortunate to have and maintain. I mean, there's one community we keep going back to. A lot of good works happened over there since 2010 when they really started going there every year, taking a group of teens and college students down there to live in the community and stay. And just knowing that and going there and how they are so appreciative of the help and the friendships.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Let's tap back to the committee for a second. If somebody was an experienced or an interested Rotarian already, and they wanted to help you out on a district level, what would that sort of look like? Or is that how it works? Or is it more of a recruiting who you want to have on the committee? Or how does one volunteer to help you?
Well, yeah, the few people that are helping will work with their clubs or their areas. Our district's divided into 16 different areas. So there's 4 or 5 clubs in each area. And I've tried to identify people in different areas, a few successfully, and other areas people, like with everything, it's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
And so I found a few people, and they'll raise some funds and organize and try and build enthusiasm for international work. And now we're working on a lot of different potential projects, Tanzania, Vietnam, Panama, Colombia. We're working on projects in a lot of different places.
Okay. What about at your local club level? How could one offer to get involved or to help? Would it be... I assume there's no international committee in our club, right?
Yeah, there is no, and I was just told a few weeks ago that it would be good if I could be the international person
For our
for
club.
our club. So there isn't an established one, but usually, I'll be speaking in a few weeks there, and usually that turns into people
Right.
learning about a project and wanting to help.
What would the criteria of success be if you had you and 4 people on this committee that was helping spread awareness? What would be the type of person you'd want to have on your committee?
Well, just someone that's interested, someone that's basically got a connection to a Rotary Club in another country.
I see.
That's the key to doing a development project. You do a lot of the preliminary work on a project in another country, but you need the people there on the ground that are going to manage the money and follow the project through to its successful completion. So you have to have people that you trust completely, or you're not going to have if they don't perform, you're not going to have a good project.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Okay. As we're wrapping up this sort of spotlight on you as a member and what your contributions are, which are far beyond what I ever knew, I'm really impressed. What traits do you think make a good Rotarian? And I'm asking that in a way, how do you know who to recruit to your Rotary Club?
That's a hard one for me because I have not been good at recruiting people.
Understood.
And I think that the people I look for and the people that I look at as good Rotarians are people that have a passion for something, and they find a way to use that passion to contribute.
I love that. Yeah.
Like you have a passion for this,
Yes.
for doing these things, and you're doing it, and it's a huge contribution, and no matter what it is, whether it's people that, want to feed hungry people and do the pancake breakfast and stuff, but or you see Steve who, delivers bread
Yeah.
every week, sort of out of sight of everybody else. I only know he does it because I run into him at Panera when he's picking up the bread, and so there's a lot of really generous people with a generous spirit that are Rotarians.
I was surprised that I'm also in charge of a float in a parade. And me being in charge, the kind of leader that I am, is a not do-it-yourself kind of guy, but I'll put the right pieces in place. But in my mind, the float was just a trailer with our inflatable on it that said, Rotary, with the members walking beside the trailer.
Mm-hmm.
But Denise approached me. She's like, what's the plan for decorating the float? And I was like, never even crossed my mind. And then I said, if you have inspiration and you know what you want to do, let me know if we need to have a budget for it and what we need to do for however your vision is, because it never crossed my mind. I was just checking that box, checking that box, checking that box. Mm-hmm. We'll be on time with what we need. But like you said, it can be something as high speed as having a connection in another country to contributing and giving back, or just a little bit of a passion to help decorate a float even. It helps. All of it helps. Yep. So I love your word passion. You have to have a passion for what you do, which will make the club better. And I think a lot of people, I'm sorry, not a lot of people, I don't want to speak in generalities, but many people, it appears, don't know how to give back or don't know how to speak up to offer what their expertise is. And I look forward to pulling that out of people as a leader or just as a presence in our club, that when somebody has a talent, we should see how can we use your talents based on the amount of time you have to commit to it, if you're even interested, to make the club as a whole better. We should all be an important part.
Well, most things you see, and what I've seen over time is, and I think Tracy just said it at the last meeting and the one before, of if you're new, find a committee.
Yeah.
And with a large club like this, it's not everybody talking. and trying to draw you in. You hope that people will be instructed enough and sort of brought in to look for the committees they might fit with, because that's where the work goes on that's outside of lunch,
right?
And that's how you make things happen.
I remember when I was new, there was a new member orientation, and at the time I was a little too overwhelmed to really understand what they were talking about. But it's almost like onboarding a new employee. If you have somebody new, here are the steps you should take to be successful at your job. Here's what you need to know. Here's where you find this information. Here are the committees available, and here's what those committees do. That could be something for the future. What?
Can we take a short break?
We're almost done with this one.
Okay.
We'll be done in the next minute and a half or so.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So we're just kind of wrapping that up. But anyways, the final question would be, if you thought somebody was on the fence about joining Rotary, what would you say to them to convince them?
I'm not into trying to convince people. What I would want them to do is come to more lunches.
Agreed.
And see, and then maybe the next step would be going through that, like what you said, onboarding a new employee. Well, we used to spend more time. There used to be a home visit for a prospective member of Rotary.
Wow.
And when that was going on, that was 30, 40 years ago, but you would sit down and say, okay, what kind of time commitment do you have? And then go through the different committees or areas and then try and focus on that person's interest.
Sure.
And so I would do the same thing. I think a home visit's a little too much, but setting aside time before or after the lunch to talk with a prospective member for 15, 20 minutes and try and find out what their interests are and try and match them. Because that's where I think people get lost. That match isn't made and then they fade.
Maybe that would be a neat concept to figure out a way to apply that. So like I said, home visits are pretty intense, but if you want your membership to engage, maybe you need to have 2 scheduled, not so much interviews, but the conversation should be scheduled where you go over these bullet points, almost one-on-one. And it'd be great if we had, and we may have, 'cause I'm still learning a lot about our club, it'd be great if we had those ambassadors.
Yes.
That knew how to follow a little bit of a guideline over 2 visits. And then you can say, hey, these guys have been onboarded thoroughly by an ambassador. That might be a really great program for the future and something that the membership community could to grab onto. I have no problem bringing it up to them and just talking about it. Yeah.
I gotta go.
John, thank you for being on the podcast.
My pleasure. I really appreciate your doing this.
All right.
I gotta go.